Camilla's grandson crossed a line at one of the most prestigious royal events on the British calendar, and what he did was so disgraceful, so deeply immoral, that Catherine, the future Queen of England, personally had him thrown out before the damage got any worse.
Well, the answer is because I cared deeply about making a positive difference in helping the most vulnerable and supporting those who are most in need.
But the real shock came when Camilla tried to stop her. She pushed back, certain she still had the power to bury this the way she had buried everything before it. Catherine stopped her cold. What she said was so raw, so ruthlessly true, that Camilla had no answer for it, and from that moment, everything got far uglier. What Freddie did at the banquet. Freddie Parker Bowles was not supposed to be the story that night. He was a guest, nothing more. But by the end of the evening, every single person in St. George's Hall at Windsor Castle knew exactly who he was. And so did Catherine. Freddie is Camilla's grandson. His father is Tom Parker Bowles, Camilla's son from her first marriage. Freddie carries no royal title and performs no royal duties, but his grandmother is the Queen Consort of England, and that connection got him through the doors of one of the most exclusive, most protocol-driven events on the British royal calendar. A white-tie state banquet at Windsor Castle, attended by over 150 guests, including foreign dignitaries, senior ambassadors, and members of the royal family itself. That access came with one expectation above every other. You behave, you represent, you do not become the story. Freddie became the story before the evening was even over. It started with the drinking, not a single discreet sip that could be overlooked or quietly managed. What the staff witnessed was a 15-year-old boy repeatedly sneaking alcohol from the table, reaching for wine glasses and spirits that he had absolutely no business touching, getting visibly louder and more erratic with every course that was served, and understand what that means in that specific room. This was not a house party or a private dinner where someone could pull him aside without an audience. This was a white-tie state banquet, attended by foreign ambassadors and senior diplomats, whose every impression of the British crown carries real international weight. Every footman in that hall was trained to observe everything while appearing to see nothing. They saw this. The guests nearest to him saw this. And the question that began spreading through that room like a slow, cold fire was not just what is this boy doing, it was who allowed this and who is responsible for him. But the drinking was not what broke the night completely open. What pushed this from deeply embarrassing into genuinely immoral was what followed. As the evening progressed and the alcohol took hold, Freddie's behavior toward the women at that table turned ugly. He made loud, humiliating comments directed at female guests and the women serving at the table, disrespectful and aggressive in a way that was impossible to ignore and impossible to excuse. Multiple people witnessed it directly, including foreign representatives seated close enough to hear every word. This was not a teenager being awkward or socially clumsy. This was a 15-year-old boy behaving as though the women around him existed for his entertainment in the most formally observed room in Britain, in front of people whose opinion of the monarchy matters at a diplomatic level. And then, as though determined to make everything irretrievably worse, he was seen openly pulling out his phone and filming. At a white-tie banquet, producing a phone is itself a breach so serious it would draw immediate attention. Recording on it was a security violation that went far beyond bad manners into territory that could have had genuine consequences for the palace. All of this happened in front of ambassadors, diplomats, and senior royals. All of it attached to the name of the Queen Consort's own blood. There is something you need to understand about Freddie's family before this story goes any further, because it is impossible to understand the full weight of what happened that night without it. His father, Tom Parker Bowles, had already put Camilla through this kind of public humiliation once before. In 1999, a News of the World journalist caught Tom on tape offering to supply cocaine at a private party. The story exploded across the British press at the worst possible moment, right as Camilla was beginning the long, painful process of trying to rebuild her public image after the wreckage of the Charles and Diana years. The palace buried the story as fast as it could. Tom was quietly managed. Camilla was quietly shielded. And nothing was addressed, and nothing changed, and everyone moved on. The British press never forgot. They stored it away with the patience of people who know that patterns repeat. They had been waiting for 25 years for the next generation of the Parker Bowles family to give them a reason to pull that story back out. On the night of that banquet, Freddie handed them exactly what they had been waiting for. And across that enormous hall, Catherine saw all of it. She understood what it would mean for the institution by morning, and she made a decision. And what she did next was something that nobody in that room had ever seen before at an event like this, and something nobody in that room was ever going to forget. The most controlled removal in royal history. You need to understand what it means for Catherine to leave her seat at a royal banquet, because if you do not understand that, you cannot fully understand what happened next. At a white tie state banquet, guests do not leave their positions at the table. This is not a guideline or a suggestion. It is simply how these events function. The entire choreography of the evening, the seating, the service, the sequence of courses, the precise orchestration of over 150 people moving through one of the most formal occasions in the world is built on the assumption that everyone stays exactly where they have been placed. So when Catherine rose from her chair quietly and began moving through St. George's Hall with unmistakable purpose, the effect on that room was immediate and electric. Every pair of eyes that caught her movement understood that what they were watching was not normal. The footmen understood it. The guests nearest to her understood it. The foreign dignitaries understood it. She did not hurry. She did not need to. The power in that walk was precisely in its calm. She reached Freddie, and she did not raise her voice. Not even close. She did not give him the spectacle of a confrontation, did not give the room a scene to describe later over dinner tables and in press briefings. What she gave him instead was something far colder and far more permanent. A few words, delivered quietly, with total composure. She told him to leave now, right away, through a side entrance, quietly. And he was not going to make this any harder than it already was. There was no warmth in her voice and no room for negotiation. She had not come over to discuss the situation or to give him an opportunity to explain himself. She had come over because the decision was already made, and she was simply delivering it. That is what a future queen sounds like. Freddie was escorted out through a side entrance, and then the room closed over the space where he had been standing as though he had never occupied it at all. The footmen continued their service. The music continued. The conversations around the table picked back up, carefully, precisely, the way conversations do when everyone has just witnessed something significant and nobody is prepared to be the first to acknowledge it openly. Freddie Parker Bowles had been quietly erased from one of the most prestigious evenings in the British royal calendar, and the evening had not even flinched. Camilla was in that room. She saw everything. What was on her face as Catherine walked back was something very raw and complicated. Her grandson had just been removed from a state banquet in front of the institution that Camilla had spent 20 brutal, relentless years sacrificing her reputation, her privacy, and her public image to finally be accepted by. The one thing she had sworn to herself she would protect her family from. This exact kind of embarrassment had just detonated in the most watched room in the country, and there had been nothing she could do to stop it. But what happened next? Away from the guests and the footmen and the gleaming formality of the banquet, was in some ways even more explosive than what had just unfolded in front of all of them. The confrontation nobody was supposed to see. Camilla did not let it go. Nobody who knows her would have expected her to. Away from the formal setting, she made her position known, and the argument she reached for was the one she had always relied on when her family landed in trouble. This should have been handled privately, quietly, internally, the way the royal family manages these things. She claimed that by removing Freddie in a way that was witnessed by an entire hall full of people, Catherine had not protected the institution. She had made the situation worse. The right move, Camilla argued, would have been a very discreet removal, but Catherine did not argue back. She did not match Camilla's heat with her own. Instead, she said something that cut straight through every defense Camilla had brought into that room. She looked straight into Camilla's eyes and said, If you had dealt with this yourself, we would not be having this conversation, because here is what Camilla could not argue away. This was not the first incident. Freddie's behavior at a smaller private royal event had already been flagged internally. Palace sources were aware of it, Camilla was told. And Camilla did what she had always done when her family caused a problem inside royal circles. She asked for it to be handled with discretion, her family protected from the consequences of what her family had actually done. And so nothing changed. The behavior was not corrected because the behavior was buried. And it escalated until it found its way into St. George's Hall at a state banquet in front of 150 witnesses. And the pattern went back even further than months. It went back 25 years, to Tom Parker Bowles and a journalist and a tape recording that should have been a turning point, and instead became just another thing the family survived by going quiet. In 1999, Camilla knew about her son's behavior before the press did. She chose silence. The palace managed it. Tom faced no real consequence. Life continued, and the lesson that was learned, the lesson that passed down through that family like an inheritance, was that silence works. That if you keep things inside the walls will hold. But the walls did not hold this time. And the reason they did not hold is that Catherine had already decided, long before that banquet, that she was not going to be another wall. When Camilla pushed further, when she pressed her case past the point where it could be attributed to a mother's instinct or a grandmother's grief, William stepped in, and he closed the conversation. His message was simple, and it was delivered without anger, and it was completely final. Catherine had acted correctly. The matter was closed. There was nothing further to discuss. For William, this was not a complicated position to take. He is Diana's son. He grew up living inside the rubble of what the royal family's habit of silence and management and quiet burial had done to his mother. He watched Diana absorb the full cost of an institution that prioritized the appearance of stability over the reality of accountability. He understood in a way that was deeply personal and entirely non-negotiable that the institution does not survive by protecting the people who threaten it. It survives by holding them accountable. Catherine had done exactly that. William stood behind her without reservation. And then there is the detail that should have ended every argument Camilla had left, though it was never spoken out loud because it did not need to be. The woman who had drawn that line, who had refused to bury the problem, who had stood up from her seat at that banquet and walked across that room to protect the institution, was wearing Diana's jewels on her wrist. Diana, whose story had been shaped in large part by a royal culture that managed problems quietly and protected reputations over people. Diana, whom the public had never stopped mourning and never stopped holding up as the measure by which the monarchy's integrity is judged. Catherine carries that legacy, not just in the jewels, but in how she moves through this institution and what she refuses to accept from it. Camilla had no answer for that. There was no answer to give. And the conversation was over. And here is the part that the public was never meant to know at all. After that night, the palace did what the palace always does. The story was quietly contained. No official statement was made. No confirmation was given to the press. The royal machine closed around the incident and sealed it from public view, the way it has sealed so many things before it. What happened in St. George's Hall that night was witnessed by over 150 people, including foreign ambassadors and diplomatic representatives, and not a single word of it was allowed to reach the outside world through official channels. Catherine knew that would happen. She knew that by morning the silence would be back in place and the walls would hold again publicly. She acted anyway. Because for Catherine, the point was never about what the press would report. The point was that Freddie knew, that Camilla knew, that every person in that room knew, that the line had been drawn in front of witnesses who could never unsee it, even if the world outside those walls was never told.